Going to talk about The Grudge, or the American remake of it. Anyone remember this film? This came out in 2005, is probably completely forgotten nowadays. But it's an American remake of the Japanese horror movie. But what was interesting is they didn't set it in America. They kept the setting in Japan. But the movie was just about a group of American expatriates who were living in Japan. And I was an American expatriate living in Japan at the time. So I took great interest in the movie. I mean, I didn't really even know much about it beforehand, but I went to the theaters at the time and saw it. I'll just read out some of what I wrote at the time. Said, with last year's remake of the Japanese horror film The Ring, Japanese horror has recently been attracting Hollywood's attention. However, Japanese Times did an article on this. They indicated, I'm borrowing their analysis somewhat, The Grudge is an interesting Hollywood remake because it keeps the Japanese setting the same. The difference is that in the American remake, it's the American expatriates living in Japan who are terrorized by the ghosts, not the Japanese people. Well, actually a couple Japanese people as well, if memory serves. Now, it's interesting the difference between Japanese horror films and American horror films. A Japanese friend once explained it to me like this. He said he thought Japanese horror films were scarier than American horror films because the setting was familiar. So the film seemed much scarier because it was related to everyday life. Like if you watch a horror film set in Japan, and then you go home to your house and kind of turn off the lights, it's not scary because Japan is so far away and nothing in your house looks like the houses of the horror film you just saw in the movie. But if you watch a horror film that's kind of set in very similar settings to the house you're living in now, it makes it much more creepy, doesn't it? So, if that's true, if we are scared by what is familiar, then this combination of a horror film and kind of a lost in translation type film about Americans bumbling around in Japan is an interesting choice. Obviously, the American audience can't identify with the Japanese setting, and the Japanese audience can't identify with the American protagonists. And yet, I thought it worked. I thought it was one of the scariest films I've seen in a long time. Although, as an American living in Japan, I guess I'm one of the few people who can actually identify with the setting. So I'd be curious about other people's takes on the movie. What did you think? Anyone else find it scary?